Our flop of the week. The new Porsche 992.2 has been announced, and it is a flop, definitely a flop in our book. So there's a few different things which make it that. Some of it is the aesthetics, the giant shark fins in the front grille. But more specifically, the GTS, which is arguably the favorite in the lineup as like the mid-range performance trim for the enthusiast driver, which has kind of been supplanted by the Carrera T. That's their quote-unquote base model, but that is like their enthusiast spec. But the GTS is a step up, a little more performance, whatever. It's not getting a manual transmission. Actually, none of them are, because they're all going hybrid. Not the hybrid like the Corvette E-Ray, which just has electric motors at the wheels, but it's their T hybrid, and it's a electrically assisted turbo and a electric motor, which is mounted in the PDK housing. So the power of the internal combustion engine goes down a little bit, or no, I'm sorry, it's increased 5 horsepower. I think it was either
overall,
5, yeah,
and it's a 3.6 liter engine versus the 3 liter.
Well, no, overall
before.
With the electric motor, it has gone up in horsepower quite a bit.
Oh, okay.
So it's going up to 532 horsepower, but there's only I think a 5 horsepower increase or 0 horsepower increase. It was negligible. But yeah, with the electric motor, it goes up to 532 horsepower, which I don't know why anyone needs that much in a base model, essentially 911. Holy crap. But it's 100 pounds heavier, and it's actually 187 pounds heavier than the manual, because you can't get the manual. So it's 100 pounds heavier than the previous PDK. But if you previously had a manual and you're like, yeah, I want to get the new one, you're adding almost 200 pounds.
Goodness. Well, so one thing that maybe I had misread, everything I've seen says next year's do not have a manual, and the GTS is the hybrid. The other models are not hybrid currently. The normal Carrera, that kind of stuff. Only the GTS has all the hybrid business.
So it gets all the extra horsepower and torque. Which I will say, one thing about how they're doing this, both the turbo and the motor assist, is it's essentially eliminating turbo lag, because the turbo spools up 2 seconds faster than the regular twin turbo engine, and the electric motor supplements the torque as it's spooling up. So you basically have no lag. So just instant torque, instant power. So from that perspective, from a linear power perspective, it's fantastic. But you could also just do that with an internal combustion engine. So it's cool how they've engineered it. But 200 pounds heavier. I'm sorry, 100 pounds heavier. I'm using the worst case scenario. No manual transmission in any of the models. Lots more expensive.
Ooh, yeah, big monies.
Yeah. The base price for the GTS is nearly 170 grand with no options, which of course you can't do with a Porsche, right? You got to brag about your CXX options, and paint to sample plus will put you basically at 200 grand.
Oof. On one hand, I appreciate the length that they seem to be going to keep a flat 6 in the rear of this car. And still, so I also read in a Car and Driver article about the car that the engine is larger, and some of this tuning is done to reduce the emissions at like high power.
Yes.
Because the engine is bigger, but the engine itself barely has any more power to it. So there's like fuel map things and stuff to be more efficient. I appreciate what they're doing. On the other hand, this sounds incredibly complicated.
I feel like they're not doing it because the engineers sat down and said, this is a great idea. They did it because the government said, you have to get more efficient with your emissions. And so they said, okay, well, what do we do? So they're engineering from a defensive standpoint instead of going, what is a great product? What is some great thing we can do? It's, well, we have to make this cleaner. So we're going to put turbos and electric motors and do all this gyrations. And yes, it's cool technology, and they're making some great strides. But I feel like it's the whole like leading from behind thing.
Did you see that they moved the water pump inside the engine?
Yeah, so there's no accessory belt anymore.
Yeah, there's no accessory belt. The AC and the power steering are driven off the electric motor in the transmission. I hope the water pump never needs serviced. All of this to me reads like if
Yikes.
like long-term ownership, not a thing. Because what recent 911 do you know
Very
of
good point.
that doesn't need a water pump every 60,000 miles?
Right. Mine's had two at 90,000 miles, I think. Or no, alternator. But I had the water pump at 60,000 miles. Very good point. It's kind of the planned obsolescence. And to me, that's not environmentally friendly. Again, that the tailpipe emissions thing is looking at one metric and focusing on one thing. But if you're building cars that are so complex and can't be worked on and can't be fixed for any reasonable amount of money, they can't last forever. That's a big emissions issue because then you're creating more cars. That's a big carbon footprint to make a car.
I also just visually, I know the Mark IIs have, since the 996 had, there's small differences. I had to really look for the differences in visually this car, other than the shark fins on the front for the GTS.
Right.
Like, it looks mostly the same. I think they got rid of the analog tack on the gauge cluster, which depresses me strongly. Digital. I hate digital gauge clusters with a fiery passion. So
we want our buttons back.
Give me buttons. Give me gauges.
Give me buttons and needles.
I'm a simple man, Doug. That's all I need.
You know it's bad, though, when the headline of the Car and Driver article is 2025 Porsche 911 GTS Hybrid is nothing like a Prius. That's not something we should have to mount a defense against. That shouldn't enter into anyone's calculations. No, I wonder if the new Porsche is like a Prius.
Do they mean that in the sense that people are very excited about the new Prius and nobody's excited about the new 911? Is that a thing?
Maybe.
People might be excited
Prius
about
is
this.
kind of cool. I think it's just talking about the hybrid system because it's the T hybrid.
Yeah.
It's Formula One inspired, whatever.
Fine.